Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us here at our 10:30 a.m. session presented by the PDMI's U.S. Hispanic Council. Should be a heck of a good session. Nicole always presents great things for our group here, and it's great to finally present in person for the first time in a couple of years. So we're going to get to that in just a moment. Once again, I want to say thank you to our educational sponsor, Mojo, and let them say a quick word.
Before the session begins, I'd just like to say that Mojo is a very proud sponsor of the education series. We hope you go to every session, ask lots of questions, and learn new things. Enjoy your day. We'll see you soon.
Well, hola, good morning, buenos días a todos. Great to see you all. Thank you, Tom, and the PDMI organization for supporting the U.S. Hispanic Council. I'm actually a little nervous. I may have thought about doing a tequila shot before starting, but I thought against it since it's not even noon. So in the last, 10, 15 years, you've heard about multicultural marketing, you've heard about Hispanic marketing, and the reality is that the U.S. and the composition of the U.S. is more multicultural and diverse than ever before. And so when you think about marketing in general, if you're not doing Hispanic marketing or multicultural marketing, you're just truly not doing marketing because you're only thinking about one segment of the population, one specific demographic. You're not considering the diverse and the makeup of the entire US and the entire consumer base. And so our purpose today is just to kind of walk you through a couple of exciting information that came out of the census, our interpretation of some of that data. We know that data is so important for everything that we do, so we wanted to share some of these trends and data points with you. And then hopefully you take some learnings and you find something new that you can take to your clients, that you can take for your campaigns, for your businesses, in terms of how to best speak to this demographic. And for the purposes of today's conversation, we will focus on the Hispanic demographic, but as you know, there are other segments that you should be keeping an eye on as well. Okay, so I'm gonna start off with intros. I'm very excited for the panel that we have today. Federico, which is here on my left. Federico is SVP of Strategy and Insights from Telemundo Enterprises, and Federico came from Miami last night, so very excited to have you here, Federico. Thanks for making the trip.
Thank you.
We also have Diaz. So Diana Diaz is from the NBC Telemundo, NBC 7 and Telemundo 20 station here in San Diego. She is the local sales director, and the station here in San Diego for Telemundo and NBC have always been very generous and helpful when we put these panels and sessions together. They're just down the street. They have an amazing building that combines the newsroom of NBC and Telemundo in the same building. And when they opened, one of the things that they were most proud of was that they were gonna hire journalists that were bilingual primarily so that they could quickly cover a story in English and then flip the mic and do it in Spanish as well. So it just speaks to, of course, we're in a very, very diverse community here in San Diego, but it just speaks to how brands and organizations and news and media organizations are thinking about the consumer a little differently. So thank you, Dana, for being here. And then last but not least, Marcelino Miyares, who is a partner and founder of D2H agency. So Marcelino is a veteran in Hispanic marketing. He's been doing this for a long time, and I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. I mean it in just a way of, there's a lot of experience and things that Marcelino has done throughout his career. He's been an influence and an impact in a lot of businesses and a lot of brands. And so, as you can tell, we have a great panel. I'm Nicole Cordero, and I'm VP of Growth of Havas Edge. And the exciting thing about this panel, too, is that all four of us are Latinos ourselves. So when we talk about the data that we're here to show you, we understand it, we recognize it, and we are that consumer that brands want to connect with. Okay, so a couple quick facts just to get everybody situated here. So I talked about how the US is more diverse and multicultural than ever. So Hispanics account for 51% of the entire US population growth from 2010 to 2020. So we were 50 million, almost 51 million, and we're now at 62.1 million in terms of the US. We're young, we're growing, we're having children in our home, we're buying more houses than we ever have before, we're putting our kids through college. Some of us are, or some Hispanics are still in college. So a very, very growing but young demographic and consumer. I like this fact because it just kind of talks a little bit about how misinformation can be shared, but 4 out of 5 Latinos are US citizens, which is very, very interesting. So when you talk about finance, banking, things that require you to have a social, have, things established, 4 out of 5 are US citizens. All 50 states, including Washington, D.C., have experienced growth in terms of the Hispanic demographic and population. So what that means is that we're not just here in SoCal, we're not just in Florida, we're not just in New York and Texas, we're everywhere, and we're growing. So when you think about regional and local strategies, you don't have to only focus on these top key markets. You can also, expand and grow and diversify. And then last little quick stat before I move it over to the panel. The share of US Hispanics with college experience has increased. So I shared, we're putting kids through college. A lot of us have already graduated from college, right? We're involved in college. And what this means is we're growing our expertise in terms of the jobs and the fields and the industries that we're focused on and that we're involved in. So it's not just agriculture and, home services. We are growing and expanding, and Latinos are projected to be very involved in executive positions and C-suite positions and board positions across all types of companies. It's hard to manage 2 screens. There we go. Okay, so I'm gonna hand it over to our panel here. We're gonna ask a couple questions, open up for discussion. Feel free to raise your hand, shout out questions. We want to make sure that we're addressing some thoughts and some feedback that you guys have as well. So we don't want to make this super formal, so please feel free to ask some questions. Okay, so the first question. What is the major key finding in the 2020 census data available that relates to Hispanics in the US, in your opinion, Federico, and why?
Okay, so as someone who has research and insights in his title, going through massive amounts of data and being able to find that one thing that nobody else saw before can get me very excited, right? Unfortunately, I don't think I can report that today because instead, I think what we're seeing in the census is a confirmation or a continuation of trends that we've been seeing for many, many years, and you already shared some of the statistics. But I think there's a couple things that when I put them together and thought about the implications of that, really made me see the census in a new light, right, with a different perspective. The first one, you had it in the first point before, Hispanics or Latinos are really the growth engine of the United States. You mentioned 51% of the growth in population in the US in the last 10 years came from Hispanics. And over the next 10 years, it's expected to be 56%. So almost 6 in 10 new residents or new people in the United States are going to be Hispanic. And what does that mean, right? If you're in a business that is trying to grow, and I'm assuming that most businesses want to grow, the new pool of subscribers, consumers, viewers, people who can be part of your growth strategy, likely going to be Hispanic. So if you're not engaging with Hispanics today, you may be fine right now, but you may not down the road, right? So it's a way to future-proof your business is by looking into this demographic. And the other thing that really caught my attention is where the growth is coming from, right? Traditionally, Hispanic population is being concentrated in a few states, California, Texas, Florida, Illinois, New York. and those states are still the ones that are adding the most people, the more Hispanic people. Like Texas alone added 2 million Hispanics in the last 10 years, California and Florida about 1.5 each. But what's interesting is where the new growth is coming from, right? If you see the states with the fastest growth, it's Vermont, is North and South Dakota, it's Tennessee and Louisiana, right? So it's places that people would not typically associate with a large Hispanic population. Now, granted, some of this, the baseline is small, right? But percentage-wise, the growth is huge, right? It's more 150%. So when you see those things together, again, the Hispanics being the engine of growth, and that growth coming from places that you would not necessarily expect, that I think has an impact on how you're planning. Again, you're reaching out to the population in general and Hispanics in particular.
Thank you, Federico. Marcelino, anything that you would like to add?
Yeah, I think you talked about where the growth is coming from. I think you could also look at it from a generational perspective, right? So right now, Latinos represent a little bit over 1 in 5 of the general population. But if you start looking at it from a generational perspective, you look at millennials, you're now getting close to 1 in 4.
That's right.
And if you look at Gen Z, that number gets even higher. It's almost 30%. So it's easy when you get a census report that you've been waiting on for a long time, and we're still waiting actually to get the full report, to want to focus on the data now. But the reality is that it's just one point in a trend that the generations are already showing the impact that we're going to have demographically in the future generations. And that applies not only from a generational perspective, but also from a language perspective. So while Spanish language may not be spoken as much in Hispanic households as a percentage of the total population, the absolute numbers of Spanish language speakers still continue to grow. And I'm not going to say exponentially, but still continue to grow in important ways. Close to 2/3 of the market speak Spanish to one degree or another. Half the market depends on Spanish for emotional connection. 1/3 of the market depends on it for everything. So Spanish in a market of 60+ million going to 70 million in 5 years is still an important, I think, consideration from a growth perspective.
Thank you, Marce. So second question, and I'm going to hand this over to Diana. What are areas where the census data lacked or struggled with that we need to be aware of as marketers?
Yeah, so the census was faced with some challenges, so a little bit of controversy too. Beginning with, it was the first time that America was dealing with an online survey, right? So then you're dealing with a little bit of technology concerns, with privacy and safety. We were also living in a political climate, so you had a little bit of a public debate of adding the attempt to add the question of citizenship on there, which the Superior Court blocked, but then nonetheless you still had that heightened fear factor and ultimately discouraged some undocumented immigrants to fill in the survey. Now the census, normally is able to go to what they call group quarters, places like college campuses or senior assisted living. And due to the pandemic, they weren't able to count correctly, or even in some cases at all. So imagine you're not able to get in there and measure those group quarters with housing unit counts, and you don't know if they're occupied or if they're vacant. So it kind of led the census to come up with new statistic techniques to be able to really get that full data. So this was able to help forecast the data sets that normally have been accounted for in the past. So it was definitely a different census than in the last decade.
Yeah, and we talked about it a little bit too, right? Like as you can see, you might see us and be like, oh, they don't look Latino, right? And so when we have to submit forms and the questions of ethnicity and race are asked, what does that mean, right? Am I white and Latina? Am I a Latina? Am I Hispanic first and not white? Like, what is that combination? So when we talk about data and data that shows the entire number of the Hispanic population, always assume that it's more than what the actual numbers report because of those factors, because of concern, of fear, of privacy, and then because of just the challenges in filling out some of these informations where you don't just know exactly what box to check. And I know, Federico, you had some additional thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're hitting the nail on the head with some of the confusion around race and ethnicity. If you look at, for example, how Hispanics identify themselves along race, you'll find some interesting things. For example, almost 40% of Hispanics classify themselves as other race, meaning neither white, black, or any of the other name options. And I think part of that is because when you force Hispanics to identify themselves with a race, there's a lot of, let me call it baggage, that comes behind each of those races that Hispanics do just not necessarily identify with, right? Another thing that it's kind of interesting, about 1 in 4 Hispanics or Latinos identify themselves as Afro-Latino, which you would think has to, or aligns with the black as a race. However, there's more Afro-Latinos that identify themselves as white than black, which again it's a little bit counterintuitive. So I think to me that speaks to some of the limitations that the census has in terms of understanding the diversity of Hispanics. I think we're going to address that a little bit more later, but we have to recognize the diversity, but sometimes the census doesn't allow you to necessarily understand all those complexities.
Definitely. And I mean, we talk about this in our industry, right? The data is there to see it, to tell us a story. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's the one on be all, right? It's not everything that that says is 100% the truth. It's something that we should use as a directional tool and as a tool to make decisions in marketing. And the key takeaway for that is just recognize the size of the consumer, recognize that we're growing. I mean, we are all kind of that desired target, right? We shop, we do a lot of things, we spend money, we do banking, we do a lot of things, and it's just a matter of if you have clients that want to continue to grow, think about this demographic as a place to grow. Okay, so Marcelino, tell us a little bit about how can advertisers use this data to improve their Hispanic marketing campaigns or to think about Hispanic marketing one way or the other.
Okay. So you made a little joke about my age when you introduced me.
No, I wanted to
This
be
is
respectful so
this
that
is
it
my
didn't sound
fifth-
like, thank you,
This
lady.
is my fifth census in the business, and I believe the fifth census that called out Hispanic as a choice for people answering. And every decade, as Hispanic marketers, we get all excited. This is the one that's going to push marketers over the edge. And the growth of Hispanic marketing is really at a snail's pace relative to the growth of the population. So to answer this question, how can advertisers use the 2020 census, I'd say listen to the numbers objectively. Listen, because the numbers are the reality. And it's time for many marketers sort of to take their head out of the sand and say, stop the wishful thinking about whether Latinos are going to become more acculturated or not, and I can wait to advertise it to them, or whether some new consumers are going to come out anyways and replace the Hispanic share of the population. So I think sort of the first thing is just let's deal with reality and recognize that this census should underscore that the market, from a demographic, from an economic, from every social economic indicator, has reached a critical mass. So really the burden is on figuring out what to do. Yeah. And it's hard, you made a reference to sort of the political culture. It's hard to not look at the census this year in political terms. And now this concept of replacement, is starting to hit the airwaves. And I would say that to not look at the market as a replacement of your current segment, but to look at it more as a reinforcement. Hispanics are sort of bringing up the rear demographically because otherwise this country would be losing population and losing GDP and everything else that goes along with negative population growth. And then they're sort of the tip of the spear in the browning of the economy because we are the largest ethnic segment of the economy and driving economic growth in almost every sector. And there's hardly a sector, you can look at big box stores, you can look at automotive, you can look at financial, you can look at telecom, there's hardly a sector in which Hispanics do not over-index. So sort of to close the loop, look at the reality of the census and then put it in context of what other data is showing about different categories. Some may be represented in this room, certainly represented in our client bases. The census is a major point, a major driver of data, but what it should be really is the connective tissue with all the other data that's out there, that it makes sense every year that it comes out.
Yeah, thank you, Marce. Diana, was there something that you wanted to add?
Sure, yeah, so we know how diverse we are, how multiracial we are. So advertisers really have to develop brands from the ground up and not retrofit the same general market approach, right? They have to go beyond the language. It's not, one size fits all. And I think we really saw that from what data has been released so far. So you're looking at, if you really want to fully engage with the Hispanic audience, you need to unlock the culture, right? And kind of really go in deep, because there's the Latino that is US born, that kind of lives in the two worlds of 100% American, 100% Hispanic. And then you have the Latino that's foreign born that really, is very diverse if you're from Mexico, from Central or South America, right? So it's very different than from, the Hispanic here. So you really have to kind of, dive in deep and look at the layers, and you're going to find a very loyal audience. Now, I would also say it would really benefit if advertisers look at the geographic levels of the population, because as we were saying before, we're not just concentrating now in Hispanic, or in populated areas. We're really spreading out. So that's really something very interesting. So when the census releases more of this data, we'll really kind of go into the different levels of the demographic and really understand, what it is with this shift and, what the demographic would look like in each of these markets. The census data is slowly being released, right? We don't have everything. I think we're going to start to seeing more in the mid 2022 to the late 22, where it will really impact in 2023.
Thank you. We're in the midst of Hispanic Heritage Month, as I'm sure a lot of you know in this room, and I don't know if you guys have noticed, but I've certainly noticed a lot more brands having some sort of activation or campaign or space for Hispanic Heritage Month. And I think what we also encourage is just think beyond just Hispanic Heritage Month, right? It's certainly a month to highlight and celebrate and leverage your brand or your client's brand in a high visibility opportunity and area. However, we celebrate our culture every single day. We celebrate our culture, all year long. And so it isn't just going through the marketing trends of, hey, Hispanic heritage, let's do something, and then we go away. It is thinking about it a little bit different, like you do your general market, where it's more evergreen and you're, activating campaigns throughout the entire year. And then we've talked about opportunities like the holiday season. It's a longer holiday period if you're a Hispanic, right? Like your holidays start with Las Posadas early in December, and then they go all the way through January 6th with the Three Kings Day or Reyes Magos. So as a folks that are in this industry that can influence brands and clients, or you may be a marketer yourself, think about also the benefits of being able to extend your campaigns and the seasonality of like a holiday season longer than you would in the general market. So there's a lot of nuances and details to it, and anybody on this panel is happy to help if you guys have any further questions, but certainly lean into your agencies and your industry partners to unveil what that looks like for your brand or for your client. Okay, so next question, and Diana, I'll let you take this one first. What is the projections for Hispanic marketing in 2022 based on the impact that the 2020 census data will have in the industry? And I think what we're trying to say with this question is, okay, once this data gets released, there's an excitement, there's gonna be like some marketing trends that are gonna pop up. What is the projection? What are the projections? What are we thinking is gonna happen once people see the size of this growth and the population?
I think you're going to continue to see, obviously, the diversity, and the Hispanic population is going to be leading the way, right? So you're looking at this segment of the market that contributes to so many, consumer categories. You're going to see, increases with health, beauty, fitness, so many different categories. So you have to really think about, what that means. And sorry, I'm having a little bit of a...
What happened?
No, it was weird. Had to jump. So the projection that I would see is the growth. You're really going to see this influx, as Nicole was saying, of that's going to translate into more brands coming into this market, right? I think you're also going to see the general market ratings decline, and you're going to see an impressions growth on the Hispanic side. Yeah. So that's really exciting. And the data is there, and it's up to us to really pepper the market with this message and let them know that the narrative, has changed. And of course, you have the buying power of this segment of the market. So clients are going to miss their goals if they really want to be able to tap into this market.
Yeah, I think as we were preparing for this, we also talked about there's a benefit of being the first one in. So right. In your industry, in your client's industry, if they're like first to market, because we're such a loyal customer, and because we appreciate and respect brands that make the effort to talk to us the right way and communicate to us the right way and meet us where we're at culturally, there is that first mover advantage that we always try to promote as well. So as you start planning 2022 with your client or for your own campaigns, think about too the opportunities to take that first mover advantage, right. Because as we know, more brands are coming. I heard somebody say that there were 138 new Medicare brands last year. A quarter of them have a Hispanic piece, and some of them are growing, and some of them are starting to unfold and unveil that, but that just speaks to those 3-4 first brands that came out. Right. It's going to be really difficult for those 134 to catch up with them, and so that's sort of so important to, when you think about your client's industry, your industry, who's in the space, how can I get share, and lean on that, because by the time your competitors catch up with you, you are way ahead of them. So there's tremendous opportunity from that standpoint. Marcelino, anything else that you would like to add?
Just playing off your point of the numbers, I think, and Federico, you're more focused on research in general, but I think over the next year and a half, as the census reports become more official, I think a lot of demographers are going to try to understand what level of undercount there is. So these numbers that we're looking at today that feel very official, right. Are probably on the low end of the spectrum. So there'll be an indicator of some percent over what we're projecting now. And then that ties in a little bit to the market, I think, is going to find its level in terms of in terms of reachability, right? So the market is growing, but our media outlets are not. Right? Our media outlets have sort of plateaued into two major networks in Univision and Telemundo, two other networks that are survivors, sort of challenger kind of brands, mm-hmm. and a lot of cable, 60, 70, 80 Latin American based or other based cable. We've been in that environment probably for the last 10 years, give or take. Now the market's growing, more advertisers are coming in, and they're crowding those resources. So I think we're going to see challenges as D2C players playing on the Univision Telemundo canvas. Right. The other networks will hopefully get a clue from a content perspective and start increasing their eyeballs. But we hope the market will find its level and things will sort of distribute themselves more evenly for us in the D2C business.
One thing I also wanted to add is that you're going to see the Hispanics drive not only the millennial generation growth, you're going to see the Gen Zs, right? And so they're going to come into the labor force, so brands have an opportunity to target them. But you really have to be careful when you do so, because you have to look at what the consumer, preference language is, because this is a younger generation, so they're getting more and more comfortable in both languages. So that's something that you have to think about too.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about language, while we all speak English and consume media in English, that doesn't mean that we don't speak Spanish and don't engage in Spanish and don't appreciate being spoken to in Spanish. So it is about finding the role of language within your brand, depending on your demographic, depending on your objectives, on your business, and how well can you service it, right? Because if all you're gonna do is put a Spanish ad and then cross your fingers and hope that they buy or convert or, register to your business or client's business, then, you might as well just leave it in English, frankly. It is about how do you use language throughout the entire customer journey? Right. How do you use culture, more importantly, throughout the entire customer journey? And grow from there. Fun fact, anybody know what the name of the generation after Gen Z is? Gen Alpha. Yep, that's the one, Gen Alpha. Okay.
That's ominous.
It's a good name. I wish we were Alpha. What was that?
What did she win?
Starbucks gift card.
Starbucks gift card. All right.
Tom? No, just kidding. Okay. So next question. Marce, I'll let you kind of take this one on, and then Federico, I'd love for you to chime in here. What's your goal as a leader in Hispanic media for 2022? Or one of your goals?
Yeah, of many. I think we, at our shop, we spent a lot of time trying to reframe how marketers and clients see the market, right? So I mentioned earlier, let's not look at the Hispanic customer or the Hispanic consumer as a replacement. Let's look at it as a reinforcement of our economy, of our business, of American culture in general. Let's not look at whether Hispanics are speaking Spanish or not. Let's look at it as a culture and frame our marketing thinking and our strategic planning and our account planning from a cultural perspective that involves language but is not defined by language. Let's not worry about country of origin. The census has spent years looking and focusing on country of origin. It doesn't matter. Even though we're not a block, a monolithic block, we have a shared experience. Whether we're immigrants, sons of immigrants, fathers of immigrants, we have a shared experience in this country that goes beyond just the traditional customer journey that you may be defining for your general market. There's a life journey that we can add value to in the way that we speak to them. Let's not focus on dialects. There's a Spanish that everybody gets. We like to call it the Walter Cronkite Spanish, only because there's no Walter Cronkite in Spanish we can refer to, but maybe Don Francisco Spanish, I don't know. But I think there's I think as responsible marketers or 2.0 marketers in Hispanic should reframe a lot of the ways that the census positions data, because we can bring insight to it. You dedicate your life to that. We all do in some way or another. But to the extent that we try to be leaders in our industry, it's really about reframing and repositioning what this market represents for our clients, for our culture, for the economy, for our businesses, for everything that we do.
Thank you, Marce. Federico?
So, I think for me, part of it is my role at work, but also part of me as member of the Hispanic community is to achieve a better understanding of what drives Hispanics. And the reason I want to do that is because I want to then be able to educate or help, as Marcelino say, help people make decisions around Hispanics. We were talking about Hispanic marketing, and I was looking at some statistics. The ANA estimates that only about 6% of advertising spend goes against Hispanics. And to me, that is, it's baffling because, again, we've been saying that Hispanics account now for almost 20% of the population, and they also account for like 11% of the purchasing power. So why is that only 6% of the spend goes against this very important group? And I think it's part of that is just misunderstanding or lack of understanding. So, for me, for 2022, I'm hoping that I can, add my grain of salt in advancing the understanding of Hispanics and demystify. I think, kind of like what you were alluding to, Marce, is like, we don't want to overcomplicate Hispanics, right? We want to recognize the diversity and recognize that they're not all the same, but at the same time, help people who may not be in the middle of it, right? Not be Hispanics, being still able to connect and engage with this group.
Yeah, and how important it is to connect with a group, an agency, a partner that really understands it so that they can kind of hold your hand and walk you through that process. Because while, it sounds very simple in idea, there are nuances to navigate, and those people are the right people to help you solve those challenges and solve those problems. So certainly lean into experts like Federico and Diana and Marcelino and myself to help you navigate through that so that we can, because it's not scary or difficult. It really is pretty straightforward from a marketing perspective. And especially as somebody that knows your client's brands or knows your own brand, we can find a role for it and try to get you to that place slowly and kind of step by step so that it doesn't feel like an extreme challenge to overcome. Okay, next question, Federico. I guess we'll just let everybody answer a little bit of this. Before we go on to our next and final question, are there any questions from the room? Anybody have any questions? Anything you want to say, comment? Sure. They're coming with the mic.
Hi. I have a question. Because the Hispanic population is growing tremendously, and not all Hispanics are just watching your major networks, right? They're also watching your general market stations, your ABCs, your NBCs, Foxes. And we're, at our agency, we're faced with, okay, we've really maxed out. We are like on all the Hispanic stations, but how are we going to be reaching these biculturals who are now here? Do you reach them with bilingual ads on these English stations? Or what do you think is an effective way to reach them?
Thank you for the question. Anybody want to take a first pass at that one?
Yeah, I think, it's a very good question and a very common one. The first thing that I would say, and I don't mean this, confrontationally, but how is the saturation in the Hispanic networks being defined? And what I mean by that is if they're being defined in a total market sort of approach, we often find that the saturation levels are not saturating, right? If it's being defined in its own universe, where its own just reach and frequency, where you're buying 100 spots a week on a given network, and okay, it's clearly saturated, that's a different animal. So I think the first thing is just to check the premise on what the saturation is on the networks themselves. And then what about the overspill? There's a significant amount of viewership on cable in alternate Spanish language Latin American channels that can pick up a lot of that. It can pick up a lot of that weight and add a lot of reach and frequency to a buy. But once you get behind all of that, you're right. There's a lot of viewership in English and measured viewership. And I think we're going to see a trend where Spanish language networks are now accepting English language advertising. I think we're going to start to see some general market, particularly in cable, some general market networks allowing either bilingual or full-on Spanish language advertising. And then OTT circumvents all of that. So a household that is identified as Hispanic can be watching, I don't know, Fox News to pick a channel and still receive ads in Spanish.
What a channel.
Yeah. Or the Weather Channel, yeah. Better said.
Yeah, that's already happening right now.
Yeah.
We're starting to see on Telemundo, even on certain sports or specials, where you will have English ads. I'm sure you've noticed already. So that trend is definitely happening because they're, it's the younger generation and it's the whole 200%er, right? So they're feeling more and more comfortable in both languages. And not only that, but viewing habits are changing, right? So you're seeing, general market shifting more to cutting the cord and going to OTT, while the Hispanic market is still, there's more stability in broadcast viewing, but that's already definitely happening. And that's the key thing with the creative, is to really talk to them. Like they say, Hispanics pay attention to companies that pay attention to Hispanics, right? So if you really address them and target them, I think that's where you're going to, win.
Yeah, and understanding, the objectives and the target demographic of those specific campaigns, and because the problem might not be solved only with, is it a Spanish, is it an English, or is it a bilingual? It might also be, how are they consuming media, and where are those places that they're consuming media, so that I can meet them in that media journey beyond just, television or linear video, but expand and understand really in depth with data like the census data, but other marketing data, what's the role of Spanish language within that demographic, so that you can lean into the preferred language first and foremost with cultural connotations, and then perhaps, navigate it from there. But I mean, we see a little bit of everything. We see English ads on Spanish networks. We see more and more Spanish advertisers on general market or Spanish ads or bilingual ads on general market stations. I think that's a trend that's coming next year. I mean, those of you who like football, ESPN was announcing the Raiders and the Chargers game last night. Throughout the week, their spot was, half of it was in English and half of it was in Spanish, and they had both broadcasters, the ESPN broadcaster and the ESPN Deportes broadcaster, so within the same spot. And so I think it's a little bit of that too. It's hard to just give a one single answer for it. It is going to be depending on what kind of advertiser we're talking about.
Nicole, if I may add one thing. So I'm very lucky because I'm in a company that has English and Spanish properties, and so we and linear and streaming. So we feel like we have Hispanics pretty well covered. Like we reach 9 out of 10 every month, which is great. But I think at the end, so we talk about we talk about language. I think the other piece is culture, right? And that is part of culture is representation, right? It's something that sometimes brands miss. They get the language, they understand they need to have Spanish language advertising, but sometimes they miss the representation, right? Understanding that Hispanics, obviously come in all different flavors, but they expect brands to be able to represent them. It's still very sad. There are several studies, one by Nielsen, the other one by the USC Annenberg School of Communication, that show that despite Hispanics being 20% of the population, they only account for like 5-6% of the roles in TV and movies, right? And so to me, that's a big miss, right? How can you, as a medium, connect with an audience if you're not reflecting them, right? So I think another way to connect with Hispanics through advertising is by representing
Great point.
them.
Yep, great point. Thank you, Federico. Anybody else have another question? Did you have a question? Oh. Somebody have a question? No, just kidding. Okay, so last question for the day here. Federico, I'll start with you, and then we'll let everybody answer this one. Do you have any advice for marketers that are thinking about Hispanic marketing but have not yet pulled the trigger?
So again, nothing like new that we haven't heard today, but I'm just going to reiterate 2 points. The first one is, please don't ignore the Hispanic market, right? And if you're already engaging with them, continue engaging, double down on it, because we've been talking in terms of people. If you think in terms of money, and I love to think in terms of money, Hispanics now have a purchasing power of $1.9 trillion. I feel like Dr. Evil saying $1.9 trillion, right? If you think about, if you put that into perspective, right? If that is 11% of the total U.S., purchasing power. If Hispanics were a country, they will be the 7th or 8th largest economy in the world. They have a combined now purchasing power bigger than the GDP of Mexico, Argentina, Colombia, and Peru combined, right? So that's a lot of money. You think about, again, 11% of all the transactions, purchases, subscriptions, all the economic activity of this country is driven by Hispanics. And if you're not connecting with them, you're probably missing on a big chunk of that. And the second advice, again, goes back to culture, right? Language is very, very important, is the number one cultural aspect of Hispanic identity, but it's not the only one, right? Again, representation, being able to connect with Hispanics on what they care, their values. But be careful with that, don't fall into stereotypes, because again, Hispanics are a very diverse group, and without overcomplicating, just be mindful that, again, they come in different shapes and colors and national or countries of origin, right? So take that into account.
Thank you, Federico. Diana?
Yeah, it's almost like you have to look at your advertising like an investment portfolio, right? So you have to look at the whole pie and not just the crumbs, because if not, you're really going to be missing out. I mean, this is the fastest growing group that's going to play a major role in the economic growth. So you really, really need to be a part of that. It's like, what are you waiting for? The statistics are there, the data is there, you know, now is the time.
We're fun people too, by the way. Marcelino?
I mean, there's so much that can be said on this topic. All of us who sell the Hispanic market run up against, you know, any number of objections. The only thing I can say is that targeting the Hispanic market is simple but not easy, right? It's not rocket science, and there's enough of us intelligent vendors out there to guide through the process. So if you look at the reality of the numbers today, the reality that they're already showing for tomorrow, you need to make the strategic decision to say, this is the market I need to start to play in. And there's nothing really new. Everything that you're going to try has been tried before for a few generations now. So it's just about finding the right partner. And we were talking about this yesterday, discussing themes for this event in May. It's not about the what. The what is simple. You know, you need to do this. It's really more about the how. And there's a lot more opportunities now. There's a lot more arrows in your quiver than you had, you know, even 5 years ago. So all I can say is, if you haven't pulled the trigger, you know, pull it and find the right partner to pull it with. And I do want to add one more thing.
Absolutely.
Complete non sequitur.
Okay.
I was driving
I'm
down.
nervous.
I was driving down from LA yesterday, and I saw a billboard that didn't say Celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month. It said Celebrate Latinx Heritage Month. And I was so infuriated that I don't even know whose billboard it was. But in this context, Latinx is not a term, I won't speak for you, but it's not a term that 96% of Latinos identify with. It's, you know, it borders on appropriation. So if you do pull the trigger, stay away from Latinx. We're still Latino, we're still Hispanic, we're still Cuban, Mexican, we're still anything but Latinx.
Yeah. I guess I'll leave you all with what Diana said. What are you waiting for? I mean, do it. Be bold. Do what you need to do so that your clients' businesses can grow and your business can grow. Thank you for joining us. I don't know if there's any final questions. Anybody have anything else that you want to add? We're here for the day a little bit longer. Oh, there's a question. Great.
Hi, yeah, just one more question. Going back to the culture, because there's so much culture in the Hispanic realm, it's just really amazing. And if you have a national brand, would you suggest like creating different creative for, you know, there's Mexican and Cuban, El Salvadorian, whatnot, or would you have just a generic brand?
Yeah, good question. I know my answer, but I'm going to let the panel.
I would say neither.
Go ahead.
I think those are very extreme. Again, maybe I'm mishearing, right? But like kind of like extreme, right? It's like either you have like very specific or like none at all.
Well, like if you want to advertise in Los Angeles, right? And then you want to advertise in New York.
layers.
Do you just have one generic ad, or would you create one for each of the different markets?
Depends on your budget then, right? I'm not going to give you a direct answer to that because I don't think I'm not probably the expert. So I'm going to let Marcelino and Diana talk to that. But what I would say is, look, I have friends from almost every country in Latin America, right? And a lot of my social interaction goes beyond my country of origin, which is Mexico, right? And so I love when brands, for example, World Cup, right? Around World Cup, that's a perfect opportunity to celebrate Hispanics, but all Hispanics of many, many different countries together, right? So I actually love when brands engage with, Mexicans and Cubans and Colombians and, in like the same, because that reflects my social experience, right? So do you need to have one for LA versus one for New York? That I'm not sure, but I love when you can, again, reflect the diversity and interaction of Hispanics of many different countries of origin.
If you can, show the nuances and the subtleties for each, it'll just go so much further. Obviously, the Latino in the East Coast, in Miami, is very different than the composition here, let's say in San Diego, and we notice that. So it's like if you can justify and somehow combining it, so it doesn't just stand out more one than the other, and maybe in that one creative, that's what I would suggest.
Marce, anything on your end?
I know that you said the budget part facetiously, but that would be a very expensive proposition to create for every country of origin. The answer to that, from our perspective, is there are many more common denominators from a cultural perspective than there are differentiators from a country of origin perspective. So if you can develop an ad that's network safe, meaning it's running everywhere and in theory connects everywhere, that's the way to go. Because I'd rather do more creatives selling the same item than more creatives talking to different people. That said, I think it depends on how lifestyle-oriented the brand is, right? So if you're Coca-Cola and you have budgets to dive deep in any given market, and you want to use music as a creative strategy, well then, yes, then you need to use, reggaeton in the Northeast and cumbias in Texas and Southwest. Then it becomes more rational to do that. But I think the default should always be, it's one culture. There are many countries of origin, but there is one Latino culture. We share a lot more than we disagree on.
Yeah, I think national brands that do it really well, in my opinion, I mean, if you think about like a Walmart, a McDonald's, a Toyota, those are brands that have been doing it for a really long time. And they have a little bit more of a blanketed approach where, their ads and their campaigns run at a national level. And there might be some localization depending on certain initiatives. But I think it's about finding that common thread, music, family, food. I mean, those are all things that unite us, right? Language, and trying to weave that into the campaign to be able to have something at a more national level. And then if the budgets are there or the desire or there's certain business objectives as to why you would want to do that regional, then of course, I don't think any of us would say don't do it. Just the traditional and best recommended approach would be to try to find something that you can leverage nationally. Are there any other questions? Oh, okay. Well, gracias. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day in San Diego, and hopefully we'll get to meet each other. Thanks.
Thank you.
And thanks to the panel. Thank you so much.